So I think the handbook is not only important historically. It is important historically because it's recovering a history that we haven't had before. And it will force us to rethink how we view the history of the interpretation of the Bible. So now in a handbook of, now histories of interpretation will have to be rewritten to include the voices of women, which include what we call the popular voice. And the popular voice is important, and it's part of this new awareness of what reception history is and how the Bible has been received in culture. And most people really have interpreted the Bible at what we would call a popular level. So historically it's important, but it's also important for the future as we engage new questions and as we engage, there's so much more work to do now. And one of the women in the book, a German woman who knew Luther, is a blind interpreter of the scripture, and her commentary on Psalm 69 is intriguing to me, and no biblical scholar has ever really looked at that before. So that's a job that somebody needs to do. So there are many rabbit trails that the handbook will open for people to engage with. And I think for students and lay people, this will be an exciting book because it will show them the importance of what individuals can do. Sometimes you think, well, what can I do? But we have examples of women who felt called of God to do something in their world. Women like Josephine Butler, who engaged Scripture, who felt the prophetic call of God to do something to change her world. And she worked on the problem of, she worked with prostitutes in England, and she was able to rally the women of England again to fight against what the so-called contagious diseases law, which said that a magistrate could examine any woman for venereal disease, but there was no consequence for men. So Butler used the story that no one else wanted to touch, the horrible story in Judges about the Levite's concubine. And she talks about that woman who was cast out and raped all night and left dead at the threshold of the door. And she, in a very prophetic way, she says, we men and women of England are just like the people on the inside. We ignore the plight of the prostitute on the outside of the door. And when you read her text, you say, wow. And she engaged Scripture, and the message of Scripture impelled her to do something to change her world. And she was a woman living at a time when women weren't encouraged to speak publicly or preach. And you read her writings and say she was preaching. She was preaching in public addresses and with her pen. And her example is exciting, and it's encouraging and compelling, because you think an individual can make a difference in the world. And she did make a difference in her world because she felt this call of God and engaged Scripture. Because of her experience of working with women, she had a new insight into how to interpret a text that at that point people didn't touch because it was such a horrible text. But she did touch it, and it was her life story. So I think the stories of people like Josephine Butler show us examples, new examples of people that will help us realize an individual can make a difference in the world.